Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Paul and John. My name is DeWayne Davis. I am the pastor of All God's Children Metropolitan Community Church in Minneapolis. Prior to arriving in this area, I had served as the domestic policy advisor to the Episcopal Church, including the presiding bishop and the House of Bishops. My portfolio included creation care and environmental stewardship. But prior to that, even my first job out of college was as a congressional staffer in Washington, D.C. I was a staffer on the Appropriations Committee. That is the committee that spends your money. And over the years, 15 years of working on that, I noticed something very interesting. That I worked on the bills that financed all of financed NASA and the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration. And one thing that I noticed that as the years went on, the requests were increasing for mitigation. That things were going on that these agencies need to work on the effects of the warming of the seas and the rising of the temperatures. When I started working with the Episcopal Church, I started to get a visit from an indigenous people from Alaska, the Gwich'in. And the stories of the decreasing areas of ice and their farming habitat were alarming to them. Things were changing so very fast that I began to wonder what was going on. Then when I went back to ministry, one of the things that occurred to me, one of the things that kept coming up is why the resistance or why the lack of conversation among people of faith? And it started to occur to me that one of the things that is going on, even in our spiritual and theological ways of understanding ourselves, is that we have had a distorted way of talking about the story of creation. I noticed something very interesting. When we told that story, we told only one part of the story. We jumped from the first day to the sixth day. That every time we mentioned that story, the story was about us. As if this was the only thing that creation was. We were creation. Nothing else. Nothing else going on. And then I looked at the word ecology. Ecology derives from the Greek word oikos, which means house. So our story of God's house was that we were the only members of God's house. A distorted story. A story that puts us at the center of the story. And so I began to think more about how do we tell that story that comes to what I think Sarah was getting at. How do we make change? How do we begin? We make change when we begin to see differently. If the science won't convince you, and it is very convincing to me, but if the science doesn't convince us, what would convince us that we need to change? Maybe we need to look at the story again, the story of God's house, the ecology, how it all fits together. The House of Bishops of the Episcopal Church put out a teaching on the environment in 2011, and they said, and I just want to give you this glimpse of how they talked about it. Affirming the biblical witness to God's abiding and all-encompassing love for creation, we recognize that we cannot separate ourselves as humans from the rest of the created order. The creation story itself presents the interdependence of all God's creatures in their wonderful diversity and fragility, and in their need of protection from the dangers of many kinds. The consequence of making ourselves the center of the story is that we assume that the great gift that we are, and it is a great gift, the gift of us being more complex than most other organisms in the creation. We are complex because we have the gift of self-consciousness. We know that we know. And therefore we act on it, and we assume then that everything belongs to the strongest and the most knowledgeable. That's okay. But here's the thing. Here's the thing. The biblical witness does not tell that creation story in that way. The biblical witness does not land solely on us, because the biblical witness knows that all of God's creation is good, and that creation praises God just as we knowledgeable people do ourselves. The psalmist said it. The heavens are telling the story, the glory of God, and the firmament proclaims God's handiwork. She sings further in praise. You make the spring gush forth in the valleys, God. You give drink to every wild animal, God. By the streams the birds of the air have their habitation. From your lofty abode, you water the mountains. All of creation, all of God's household acting together, being all a part of it. Oh, it's not just about us. Somehow we thought it was. Then Isaiah says it. Isaiah believes in God's dream for the world. So then Isaiah says, on that day when God's shalom is made a reality, the wolf shall live with the lamb, the leopard shall lie down with the kid, the cow and the bear shall graze, and their young shall lie down together. Oh, the family coming back together. No one more important than the other. But all of us, being a part of God's household. I am the youngest of 15 children. And when my parents left the house, the older kids had to be responsible for me. They were no more important than me. They were no more loved than I was loved. But they had an added responsibility because they were older. They had more knowledge than I. So it wasn't that they get all the perks. They get to rule the house with reckless abandon. No, they had to take care of the little ones. They had more responsibility. They had more responsibility for the Davis's creation. And so let's tell that story differently. Let's go back to the first day, the very first day. When the declaration was made, let us make them in our image. But they did not start with us. They started with a house, an ecology, putting things in their place so that then we will show up. And then we will praise God along with the creation. And then we would co-create with God a world worth saving. The most hopeful part of the Bible, I think, and you'll be surprised when I say it, is Revelation 21. In Revelation 21, there is no talk about packing your bags and leaving. There is no talk about rapture. There is no talk about the end as an event. In the end is God. And God is coming back to be with God's good creation. That's a hopeful vision. And the question for us is, will we be ready as a people of faith to receive God again? Thank you.